afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Enabling Water Smart Communities webinar series. This is the last one in our series for the autumn, and it's focused on community-led stewardship for water smart communities. So just a few housekeeping things before we get into the details of the project. So this webinar will be recorded. If you have any technical issues and need assistance during the webinar, then please raise your hand and use the chat feature on Zoom and let us know what the problem is and how we can help you. We'll take your questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So if you'd like to put a question or comment to the speakers, then please use the Q&A function on Zoom. So that's different to the chat function. So the chat function is for technical issues, and then the Q&A is for questions or comments about the content. And when you're asking a question in the Q&A, please say which of the speakers you want to pose the question to. Okay, so this, as I said, is webinar 5 of the series on community-led water stewardship. And these are the speakers and panelists that we have today. You've got me kicking off the session. So my name is Kat Moncrief, and I'm at CIWEM, the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management. And CIWEM is leading on the communications and engagement part of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. And then Stuart Edwards from United Utilities will be diving into the detail on community water stewardship, and he'll be joined by Lucy Stewart from Arup. And then we also have Nicola Morris and Charlie Murphy, who are here to answer questions as well, because they've been involved in the project. So welcome to all of those panelists and welcome to everyone here today. I'm going to start by giving a quick intro to the project. Apologies for those that have joined these webinars previously, because you may have heard this already, but I think it's important just to give a bit of background before we dive into the detail. So what is Enabling Water Smart Communities? So it's an innovation project, and it's exploring the relationship between integrated water management, community practices, and housing development. And it aims to unlock opportunities for delivering water smart communities and ensuring the long-term stewardship of water. And it's that stewardship that we're going to be really focused on today. The project's funded through the Ofwat Innovation Fund, and you can see that we've got many different partners involved in the project, including water companies, Arup, academic and research institutions, and we've got the Community Land Trust as well, who Nicola is representing today. We also have an independent program board which guides the project and keeps us focused on the right things, and they're made up of developer organizations and relevant government bodies, and also some other partners as well. So what's the challenge that this project is trying to address? Where does the need for this project comes from? So there are shared challenges faced by the water and housing sectors in England and Wales. So I'm sure you're all aware that the new government is very much committed to build, and it wants to build 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years. But this housing growth will mean demand on water and wastewater services is going to rise massively, and there's going to be knock-on impacts for communities and also for the environment as well. So by 2050, we expect the water deficit to be at least 4.8 billion litres per day in this country. And that's over 2 million extra wheelie bins of water per day. Areas such as Cambridgeshire and North Sussex are already running out of water. And as you can see from that map there, the whole of Eastern England is already classed as seriously water stressed by the Environment Agency. But then we've also got the other extreme. Flooding is becoming more prevalent, according to the research from the Climate Change Committee. At present, 1.8 million people are living in areas of the UK at significant risk of flooding, and that's going to rise to between 2.6 million and 3.3 million by the 2050s. So the Enabling Water Smart Communities project is trying to look at these challenges to water holistically, and it's doing that by identifying enablers to accelerate the uptake of water smart communities, and kind of within that, smarter ways to manage rainwater and wastewater and address challenges around too much and too little water. And in doing that, deliver positive outcomes for people and also the environment as well. So what do we actually mean by a water smart community? It's essentially where there are water efficient assets and systems like rainwater harvesting and sustainable drainage systems. It's where those things are included at the design stage and kind of built into the fabric of the place. But it's also about members of that community understanding, valuing, and taking ownership for those assets and systems so that water is used wisely and with care for the environment. So as well as identifying enablers for getting the physical assets and systems to work, the project's exploring how communities perceive and interact with water and new developments, and what that means for the design of the water smart community. So before I hand over to Stuart to talk through the stewardship work that we've been doing, I just wanted to kind of give a bit of an introduction to where that work had come from. So we had an initial discovery phase of the project where we reviewed different case studies, wrote articles with research institutions, and undertook a number of interviews to explore different perspectives and challenges associated with water smart communities. And this phase also identified blockers associated with adopting water smart communities within the UK and what needs to happen to remove or resolve those blockers. And we named those enabling actions for water smart communities. Those enabling actions were grouped according to 3 identified principles for enabling water smart communities. Those were value, assets, and stewardship. So these enabling actions, the priority ones that we're working on now, are on this slide here. And so you can see that there are different enabling actions under those different principles of values, assets, and stewardship. The one that we're focusing on today is this community-led stewardship approaches, but you can see that there are other ones there. And the other webinars have dived into the details of those. So I won't go into any more detail on those now, but just to say that the values one, for example, was focused on investigating different case studies of water reuse and engaging with developers and local authorities to try and understand the kind of benefits of water smart communities and how those could be maximized and shared. So I think that was our webinar 3, I think. And then our last webinar was on assets and particularly focusing on water reuse and what the blockers are and enablers are for instigating on-site water reuse. So I think I'll stop there and pass over to Stuart, who's going to focus on the community-led stewardship work.
Thank you, Kat. Hi, everybody. Next slide, please, Kat. So this enabling action project focusing around stewardship. So just linking in with what Kat said there, there's originally 65 enabling actions that have been distilled down into nine action areas. These action areas are around governance. They're around upskilling people, they're around community and citizen involvement, they're around how financial and economic instruments can help with long-term stewardship. And what we've done is really we had an original assumption really that we wanted to test, and it was really the assumption that communities really wanted agency in water management and wanted to develop a stewardship model around that then delivers integrated water management, the positive outcomes for neighbourhoods, and aligns with the enabling water smart community stewardship principles when we talk about having water centric to the design of what is a water smart community. As part of that, what we've done is we've focused really on sustainable drainage. Hello, have I returned? A bit of a freeze then? Something went wrong then? Can you still see me?
Yeah, we
up?
lost you briefly.
Lost me briefly. So
you sound good now.
I sound good now. So it's to focus on sustainable drainage systems, really as an in situ aspect of integrated water management. We're looking to layer on the other aspects of the key components of enabling water smart communities, linking with the other work streams to look at possible water consumption reduction and incorporate that within the stewardship approach. As part of this project, we've really brought together across a section of expertise, as you can see from Arab Community Land Trust Network and Claire's Centre Local Economic Studies. And what we're going to talk you through really is go through at the moment a bit of a brief introduction to stewardship, those who are fresh to this, a bit of a commentary about our design-led approach, take you through a number of the key findings we're picking up, and really go through the co-design and the blueprints that we're going into at the stage at the moment. And I really want to touch on the enabling action project that span out of stewardship, which was the green finance, and really touch on those financial instruments. Just go over some of the concepts there that we're looking at. Next slide, please, Kat. So when we talk about stewardship, part of this project is to really rethink about what these components are. And one of the first thing that sort of jumps out at us is really that stewardship isn't just about managing assets. From a utilities background, for me, you know, that's always the first thing that jumps into my head. But it's got to be focused about placemaking. It's got to be something that is for communities, the local environment, enables the local environment to thrive. It not only requires the provision of the places, the infrastructure and assets that allow people to live well and nature to flourish, but also that these places and assets are cared for in perpetuity, which is pretty key. And again, this links in with having water centric to the design. Stewardship is essentially looking after water as a common good that is underpinning these concepts. And community-led stewardship is a way for local citizens and community stakeholders to collectively manage and sustain their environment. Next slide, please, Kat. So very briefly, just to sort of touch on some of the benefits really of community-led stewardship. Some of them, and not all of them, can have non-for-profit status, and that can help when we think about estate management charges. One of the concepts that we looked at from the beginning that we continue to look at is the estate management component. So when people, when you buy a brand new house, there is estate management levy charged on managing the public open space and managing the sustainable drainage systems. And some of the concepts we were looking at was if we introduce something that was non-for-profit, would that potentially benefit residents and wider community there? Is there something in there to look through? We're considering potential wealth creation within the local community. So creating jobs and functions there, but also consideration of reducing local wealth abstraction, having something where jobs are created, wealth and investment is carried out within that local community. The community is involved, builds better links with the local governance, the local government, have been more accountable and more democratic. The wider benefits to the community, and the wider benefits to the community and future development is having that open discussion prior to engaging into planning matters and the full planning process, and engaging on where, as a much larger master plan, on what the areas we want to achieve and how we're going to do that. And I think private companies coming into this remit would benefit when reporting the corporate social responsibility and their reporting mechanisms around that to incorporate some of these features and link them through. Next slide, please, Kat. And I'd just like to hand over to Lucy, who's going to talk us through the navigating the complexity through our design-led approach. Go over to Lucy.
Thanks, Stu. Hi, everyone. So as Catherine mentioned, this is the wider Enabling Water Smart Communities is like a innovation-funded program, and therefore I think it's almost assumed that permission is granted to learn and adapt an approach. And I work in a design studio at Arup, and we've been holding the research and the findings, just kind of using this classic double diamond approach to explore the problem space, but enable to flex our approach and head towards a specific direction. So it really is about providing enough structure while also maintaining flexibility. And we originally scoped the project across 4 objectives, and I will share with you later in the presentation about how these have changed. We're currently heading into the second diamond of the, the second half of the first diamond, and looking at how we bring people together within a process of design. So if you go to the next slide. Oh, I think there's a slide before that.
Sorry, it's just glitched and I can't get it back.
That's okay. Basically, I was just going to say that we've been working together as a partnership, Arup, CLES, Community Land Trust, and United Utilities since summer to identify water stewardship case studies, and there really aren't that very many, as well as identify what we can learn from other stewardship models, community energy schemes, and local ownership initiatives, which is why having the Community Land Trust and CLES as part of this has been so important and also so enlightening. We'll go into more detail about why water is different and the unique challenges water stewardship presents. But this slide captures all the work we've been doing to understand this complexity around housing in the water sectors. It's been really challenging and very humbling. So we've developed a suite of tools that we thought and still think can be used with communities to identify models for stewardship. We tested our understanding and suggested approach in workshops with experts. We realized very quickly that we had to zoom out from just focusing on the community and figure out the roles of others in the system and what they need to change and allow in order to enable stewardship. And based on our learnings, we've had to reframe our goals, which I will outline in more detail later. But Stu, if you want to take it back and go through the insights.
I will do. Thanks, Lucy. Everybody, so we're going to go through a series of insights now that we've pulled out, and as Lucy aired to there, really, the case study review that we went up really questioned our shared understanding of the idea of agency in water stewardship. Our original hypothesis was proposed that people wanted agency in water management, but case studies and working with people and organisations really suggest that local people really want better outcomes, but they don't always want the agency in reaching them. So it's sort of a view that it's not always likely, that it's quite unlikely at times that community will volunteer to maintain water assets. And this really needs to be, and these sort of concepts of community and working with water assets really needs to be derived at the inception. Really well before having a site and handing it over to a community. It needs to be driven at the very concept, the earliest stages of thought planning. So water stewardship is more of a design question than anything else than we're finding. Communities, water stewardship, as I've said, is fundamentally a design challenge. And I think without having those early design discussions about, well, what is it you put in what water assets, and having that engagement, then the stewardship doesn't really work. And I think there's lots of different players involved in moving this forward. Sometimes communities are driven to have total stewardship of certain assets. In some cases, it needs a separate driver. We'll talk about that as we go through these other insights. The next slide, please, Kat. I think one of the key things that we've pulled about is the difficulty in taking learnings from community-led stewardship in other sectors. You know, there's been, and I'm sure people on this call will find many good research examples and ones we found from this project already that engage community-led stewardship and have great governance. But these are generally found in these other sectors, in energy, buildings and land, but they aren't necessarily easily transferable to water. So, for example, if we talk about energy, there is often a financial remuneration, becoming a shareholder in a solar panel farm or hydro. Individuals get massive, you know, incentives through the obvious price of water and price of energy spiking through the roofs and facing discounts and finding alternatives. And there is the whole ownership of buildings and land. There is a cultural and nostalgic importance that is difficult to apply to water. So there's a number of challenges in terms of the financial remuneration, and other sectors components don't necessarily transfer across very easily. Next slide, please, Cap. I think one of the key points we've picked up is that lower land values really limits investments in water infrastructure. And what we mean by that is we've seen examples where there has been very philanthropic individuals, get the word out, who are really drive certain site innovations, so have really brought across really innovative suds, made them really shallow, really brought the communities on board. But this has been done with a degree of affordability because the land value has been quite high in the region. And although these gold standard approaches are fantastic, there are challenges in bringing them across to less affluent areas and incorporating those. The volume of house building, as we know through government targets, is really being driven by its speed of delivery to get houses built. And innovating some assets, not all of them, do need more time for their integration and community involvement. And as I said, some great examples of innovative integrated SUDs, sustainable urban drainage systems, have been implemented by a key driver behind them. And where we don't necessarily have those key drivers or those key communities with key interests as a group to drive certain initiatives, then there may be roles for other anchor institutions to bring that forward. Next slide, please, Cap. I think the key thing is that it sounds a bit daft, this. Water is on the agenda. Water is not on the agenda. It's a blind spot. What do we mean by that? When we talk to community professionals, you know, the biodiversity net gain is well up there, carbon, energy is well on the agenda, but water isn't. Water's seen as an afterthought. There's already examples where sustainable urban drainage systems it's not the first thing that's thought about in the site design. It's usually come about afterwards through other priorities. Getting the houses built, then sorting the drainage out afterwards has been a common held area in development. But there are innovations in the development sector as well. Based on our survey, and this is with Community Land Trust Network and other general people in the population, other studies that's gone on in the project led by University of Manchester, there's a limitation in understanding from communities and how the water assets were maintained. Whilst they had this lack of understanding of maintenance of the water assets, they did have a very good understanding of what the goals and what they wanted to have out this sort of, not wanting to partake in the agency, as we said before, but very much wanting to have the output, the concern about flood risk, concerns about water, running out of water, concerns about the environment. But wider than that, when we talk about water not being on the agenda, despite water's crucial role in enhancing biodiversity and carbon capture, its benefits are not immediately tangible, and therefore not currently, there's no incentives or credit system in place to recognise this value, which is something I'll touch on later with green finance. It's likely the benefits of water will be most beneficial at the regional scale, where water assets mitigate overflows and pressure on wider water infrastructure with clear implications for local flood plans and water companies. Next slide, please. Another point to really bring out on the insights is that there's great variability in housing models, and the great variability in all the different housing models and how they operate really pose significant challenges to scaling or having any one model and scaling it across to everybody. So the thoughts are here that we'd have something that would apply, and Lucy will talk to you a bit about that later in our blueprint about how we can be flexible with that. But there are currently several different actors involved in house building, as most of you be aware, including private developers, local authorities, registered social landlords, community-led developments, amongst others. They're all developing different spec of housing with different levels of IWM, which creates challenging scaling and replication. Many will say that the mixed tenure, the private homes have been mid-market rent as social tenants shown in the same facilities, provides a challenging clarifying who pays for what and whose responsibility. Which another thing we need to look into and pull together is the roles, responsibilities of all these different sectors and see how we can align. It's also important to note that there's challenges in applying a replicable model in developments in greenbelt areas and against versus urban high density developments. So how the different geographies come into play as well. Next slide, please. So what we're talking here then is about the challenges in transitioning governance responsibilities when developers step away. So when we're talking about an estate management approach, take that as an example, when the developer steps away and that's handed over to an estate management company, or is that handed over to a resident management company? What are the challenges there? And we just saw about that. We're talking about other factors where the community ends up involving, having ownership of these estates. What does that mean? So there's a difference between initial state and future state of governance and stewardship for water in new developments, and how governance starts in development and then how it shifts to another form of collective decision making. Is everybody still with me? Because I'm getting internet warnings, I'm afraid. And then how it shifts from another form of collective decision.
Still good.
Still good, good. So how governance starts in a development and then how it shifts to another form of collective decision making as developers step away and handover process to communities, resident management organisations is needing to be mapped. And this handover is a vital part of enabling water management and needs to be examined in more detail. Come up with the concepts here of the estate management, the site, the governance factor, having the local authority and the combined authority, and maybe having as part of that governance an integrated water management planning system that incorporates all of that. But this is something that we're looking into at the moment. Next slide, please. Current estate management models aren't necessarily invested in managing water assets effectively. This has been a finding really of the Competition and Mergers Authority, which has raised issues with current estate management on residential sites in terms of meeting residents' needs, residents having the ability to swap estate management companies. The concern there is that if the findings from the CMA that if certain roles or services weren't being provided, then the current assets of public open space, the SUDs, are possibly being maintained as well as they could be doing, and the public open space can be maintained as well as it's doing. And the community then is quite frankly disengaged with that. So some of the key points are resident management companies are struggling with water stewardship. Liability and responsibility are not always explicitly understood by homeowners, and adapting resident management companies to facilitate water stewardship would remain significantly challenging. I believe it is possible, but significantly challenging to augment. There are, from this, not a blanket whole industry, but there are estate management companies out there that do exceptional work. There are also ones that are really struggling with this, and the whole sector's faced significant challenges with a number of new requirements coming out in the environmental sector. So there's a number of aspects that's being looked into, and we understand that the government is reviewing this area. So there's a lot moving in this space. Next slide, please. So what I'm saying is stewardship needs to be considered at inception and design stages of a new development. So it's rare that a project, a special scale, will originate from a community. It's more likely a developer, as we said, a driver, a developer, local authority, a very philanthropic landowner who kick these off and galvanize the community. So it's not always it's going to be a community driving this change. It's going to have separate forces. It's already likely to have a financial, some sort of anchor institution involved. You need to consider stewardship at every stage of the site development process, from inception through design planning and the final phase of completion. So people, it isn't news breaking this, but getting people involved at the very early stages is far easier to then take them through the rest of the journey and actually get them to evolve and compose the design to help to get the output. Why we're planning our next stages around, why we're planning out our next stage around bringing these systems and actors together as we incorporate all of this into the later thinking. Next slide, please. And then on this slide, really, I'd like to hand over to Lucy, who's going to talk to you about the adapting the project and the approach for its outcomes. Thank you, Lucy.
Cool. So yeah, as I alluded to earlier, like insights from this enabling actions discover phase highlighted new opportunities and challenges that kind of promote a strategic shift to ensure the project remains aligned with real world needs and delivers meaningful outcomes. I think our initial design project outcome that we could develop a replicable stewardship model. And it feels so silly sitting on this side of the research to say like that's probably not possible because of the well, everything that Stu talked about, the complexity of housing, the important role that developers, local authorities and others play in integrating water assets in site development in the first place. And I was just answering a question from Sarah in the Q&A. I don't think it's fair to assume that most communities don't want to be involved. You know, we definitely spoke to some that did and really went and informed their site planning based on water. It's just that when we think about our initial outcome, which was to develop a replicable stewardship model that specifically worked for volume house building, it became very difficult to understand or develop something that could be kind of replicable. And so we're kind of developing new project outcomes, which is the beauty of an innovation approach, which is to really use the opportunity of the wider enabling water smart communities work to get water on the agenda and really articulate these systems barriers, which Sarah, you alluded to really well, that it sounds like you've experienced. And we want to define principles that start to overcome some of these. And we want to explore these questions in place at a site that's maybe suggested to be a volume house building site in future, where we have seen water stewardship work. The sites are quite small and largely led by kind of community perspectives. So yeah, it's been an interesting endeavor to kind of dive deep and really understand these system barriers that stop everybody from potentially realizing the barriers, benefits of water stewardship, not just those that can afford to think about it in their designs. If we go to the next slide. So what we're really moving into now is kind of more partnership building, really convening people, proactive developers, local authorities together, specifically, ideally, in the Northwest, where United Utilities is based. Yeah, we want to bring these people together with a community land trust to really start to apply our learnings and practice in a specific place on a specific site. And how we're kind of aiming to do that, if you go to the next slide, is kind of codify the approach to water stewardship from the inception of a site all the way through master planning, pre-planning, planning, construction, and that key transition stage that Stu alluded to embed water stewardship across the whole development pipeline. And all of this is being captured in our water stewardship blueprint, which is something that I'm hoping we can use to bring all of these different groups together in a convening process to actually start to address some of these key barriers that we are that we've uncovered in a little bit more of a systematic way. So this is very much work in progress, but hopefully it will evolve as a bit of a tool that we can convene people together around. So lots of unanswered questions, really, but we really need to start bringing our work specifically to place and a place, and start to really, develop that community-wide understanding, anchor institutions. But I'll hand it back to Stu to finish.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. We just wanted to really touch on really the green finance aspect. The sort of, it's very embryonic at the moment, and this diagram is just to sort of illustrate some of the higher level concepts that we're bringing together to really find, well, when we talk about green finance or nature-based finance, and it's a way of how can we fund some of these initiatives. How there's been what we call cap and trade programs before. Water companies have environmental incentives to a lesser and greater extent from feedback from developers on how successful or not successful they've been. But what could we do that would be really transformative for the water sector to really bring that across, to bring water as more assistance to that. And this was looking really further afield and some ideas. One of them was around really this revolving fund. And revolving funds really works from savings from investments brought about by improving efficiency, and are captured and reinvested to either reduce the need for new finance or to increase the impact of what finance is needed there, so to help funding of certain schemes or certain products. The idea is it creates a continuous cycle of money which revolves rather than being depleted. This is just an example that's quite exciting for us to look into. There are pros and cons of this revolving fund. If it's depleted too much, it runs out. If it's not used enough, then it's just been used as a savings pot. That's no good to anybody. But what we have seen is, certainly looking when we said we looked in other sectors, we've looked across carbon as well. Although it's retrofitting domestic sector, it did improve the efficiency by 26%. It reduced the cost by 26% in those areas. So it's really how we can get funding to help people. And is this something that could work better? I haven't got time really to go into all the ins and outs of that or the other bits, but this is something that revolving really. I just thought I'd put that in to say we are looking at other financial mechanisms, what's out there globally, or what could be applied to help us here. Next slide, please. And I think finally, really, it's a bit of an ask. So thank you for your questions already. I think the opportunity here is that if you're a developer of a residential site and you're looking for an innovative stewardship solution to maintain your open space or subs features, are you interested in exploring a stewardship approach? If so, please just put your Q&A in the Q&A. Please just put your name in the Q&A, or alternatively contact me on stuart.edwards@uplc.co.uk. Please don't put any personal information in there, just your name, and we'll contact you, or if you want to be contacted specifically on this. But we're really looking for, like I said, the site in the Northwest region. We're keen to work. You're keen to work as a partner to help the team co-design the plan new models and explore how this approach could assist with wider aspects such as biodiversity, net gain and planning, and establish that principles that can be taken forward. So if you are interested in this, please let us know. Thank you. Next slide. I'd just like to say thank you for your time, and it's open to questions now. I don't know, Kat, if you want to field some of the questions out, we'll try our best to answer. And I'll bring my colleagues on, Charlie,
Sure.
John from Clares, and Nicola Morris from Community Land Trust Network.
Sure. I wondered whether Charlie and Nicola just wanted to give a very short intro to their involvement with the project, or their involvement with this type of work.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So the Community Land Trust Network is an advocacy and membership network around promoting sort of like community ownership, not just of housing, but of land, community business, etc. And the concept is sort of like around a not-for-profit democratic way that communities can have agency and power over assets. And speaking to one of the questions in the chat is generally the focus has been around affordable housing, but we're getting a growing sort of like interest in the environment and in land and the ownership and stewardship and custodianship of the environment. So that's how our involvement within it. Community land trusts are, by their nature, sort of, and how they've grown, small developments. But again, we're seeing a much larger trend for that concept to be developed at a larger scale. Historically, you know, we've had the new towns and the garden villages which are built on those principles, and we're now under the new government sort of like, yeah, that's another sort of like emerging theme of how can we develop community ownership on a neighbourhood level. So that's summing up. Over to Charlie.
Yeah, I work for an organisation called the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. So we're a think and do tank based in Manchester, and we really look at how we can make local economies work for local people. So really trying to tackle things like wealth extraction, make sure kind of economies that do work for people and places as well. So one of the main ways we do try and achieve that is through community wealth building. So some of you may be aware of that, but community wealth building is really about looking at using the power of anchor organisations. So that could be the council, could be housing associations, could be water companies, and looking to use their spend and their land and assets to try and keep that money circulating in the local economy and tackle wealth extraction. So our kind of role in this has been looking at governance and stewardship models from other sectors, and kind of some of the learnings we could try and take from them. But it's also trying to maybe bring a bit of a economic perspective to things like state management companies and stewardship more generally, and looking at what the potential economic impact of having a community-led stewardship model could be. Be happy to answer any questions. I'm not too sure on the specific water stuff, I might not be able to, but on the wider stewardship stuff, I'm really good.
Thanks, Charlie and Nicola. That's great. So Lucy's already been answering a couple of these, typing away. But let's see if we can answer some of these live. So I'm actually going to go to one which is number 3, actually, from an anonymous attendee, who's saying, as a resident of a new build estate, the management companies are expensive and ineffective in maintaining community facilities such as playgrounds, parks. So effectively, new homes are getting taxed a second time for facilities that are used by non-estate residents. Please can a more central organisation take on a stewardship role, as otherwise new properties are going to end up with additional taxes on top of the council taxes. So I wondered whether maybe Charlie or Nicola, you wanted to take on that one?
Would you want me to jump in first?
I guess it's more of a comment.
I can make a comment on that if that's okay, Nick. Yeah, I can see from being a new resident on an estate management estate, that's one of the things we were considering, that actually you move on to new estate, you're then paying this extra fee annually, you're paying for these services, and in some cases are not actually being provided. You're getting poor value for money, and this, as we alluded to in the presentation, the Competition and Merger Authority did look into this, and it came away with a bit of a recommendation for it needs extensive review. Now, the current government has taken on board that they're going to do a review on that. The ins and outs and how that could be changed, my colleague Nick could probably give you a bit more insight on that. So I'll hand over to Nick, but generally, yeah, it's seen as a widespread problem. It's something that's been going on for about a decade. It used to be, new estates used to be adopted by the council, and it's ended up going into private hands. And this has caused issues where services aren't being provided and sites aren't being managed properly or effectively. Nick, are you okay to jump in?
Yeah, to back up Stuart, is currently a very hot topic with the new government, with the leaseholder reform, and they are carrying out lots more consultation, and we can expect, I think, not straight away because there are many priorities, but we can expect further legislation and action around that. But speaking to what we see, the benefits of community stewardship, is there's key elements in it, which means, one, that it's in perpetuity, the management of the sort of like environment. So it doesn't get handed from company to company. It's actually lodged with the community and that governance model. And the other thing is, it's not for profit. So the governance structure actually sets up that the company or the charity can only act for the benefit of the community, which is how it can direct sort of like good quality environment, also taking account of the affordability sort of like concerns of the actual residents. So that's the key sort of like sweet element in community stewardship, which we'd like to see sort of like going forward. And I think would answer many of those questions of poorly maintained and expensive public environments. So back to Catherine. Anyone else?
Yeah. And I think what you've said there in part responds to the last question about what we mean by water stewardship. I don't know whether you want, if you've read that and you want to respond to what's written there.
Just let me pop to the bottom of the thing.
So it says that mainstream house builders are already setting up regimes for long-term management of SUDs in the face of local authorities refusing to adopt management of swales and things. So a large development on the edge of town where I lived is planned around a rather epic series of swales and basins. They're going to be owned by the house builders until completion, maintained by a landscape management company who have previously mostly done the commercial office things. And then on completion of the landscaped areas will be transferred to an RMC. Not sure what that means actually. And
it's a resident management company.
Right, sorry.
Shall I answer that, Stu?
Yep.
Yeah, a resident management company is an already established vehicle for managing this. It exists from a membership of each resident who has a freehold or a leasehold within the development. We've looked into that structure and it's similar to sort of like community stewardship, but we're kind of looking at a larger scale of that to be able to support that principle, because often resident management companies struggle to find residents willing to act as directors and struggle to involve residents as their members. So when we talk about the community stewardship vehicle, we're looking at about something similar to that, but trying to have a more robust, more connected model than the current model that's available. So I think that's...
Thanks, Nicola. I'm going to go up to the top now. Question for Stuart here from Phil Henry.
I just about to respond.
Okay.
It's all right. Go on. Yeah, by all means, go on.
I think it's good to respond in talking so that everyone can
Fair enough.
Can hear. So do you agree that to achieve biodiversity net gain plus the 10% requirements, that needs to be fully integrated with good SUDS design, given the trend in more partnership housing via RPs, LAs, etc. This is a great opportunity to influence good design, engagement and delivery.
Yes, in short, I think it is. From our point of view and looking at this, we've seen the challenges biodiversity net gain, and we've heard from developers the issues they've had with using potable water to water plants. And it's a case of, well, you've got SUDS on those sites. Why aren't we using that water better to help with the biodiversity net gain? So some of the things we're hearing from developers and local authorities as well is being careful of having another ask, because there's so much going on. And some of the things we're trying to think of is saying, well, it's not trying to have another ask, it's trying to say, well, how are you doing things now? If we do it slightly differently, we could get a lot more benefit. But yes, no, in your point there, I would tend to agree, and I tend to say that could it help us to get the integrated SUDS that have been talked about for many years? And is it a good opportunity? Yes, I think it is. But there's certain challenges that we need to work through. If that answers your question, Phil, unless there's anything else you want to add to that.
Water companies, there are a couple of questions about the involvement of water companies with this. So I'm just looking at one from Simon Dre. Has the study looked at working with water companies to establish residential and business smart water and sewage tariffs, and perhaps based on community total consumption as opposed to individual water bills? And then there was another question about whether other water companies are running similar schemes to this.
This specific area in terms of stewardship hasn't directly looked into that, but water companies are constantly looking at their tariffs and charges, and looking at the moment our environmental incentives are directed towards developers, and we have tariffs and charges, and if the tariffs and charges aren't working effectively, then it promotes us to review and to cite different ones, and they're constantly evolving to deliver better benefit to water bill paying customers and making sure they're getting the best value for money. I haven't got a lot in there that we've looked at specifically on that around adjustments to tariffs for this, but it might be something that does come out of the green finance work. There might be adjustments to tariffs there, or there may be more of what we've dubbed anchor institution, which can incorporate local authorities, water companies, that on government to pay into this fund that helps to fund certain initiatives and things like that. So is there any other, sorry, I can't see the question, so I hope I've addressed most of the key points there. It's quite a big question. If there's any other bit I've missed there, Kat, sorry.
No, I think that's good. Thank you. There's one here about Schedule 3. So that's currently in limbo. So this is a question from Tom Palmer. Schedule 3 is currently in limbo. Water availability is so variable across the country. How does the panel see the best way to mainstream water smart communities into the future? Is this best through regional carrots, development subsidies and reduced rates from water companies, or national sticks legislation, or both? And I suppose this is really talking to what the whole project's about, isn't it, really? And I think we're working on a number of different approaches through the project, both on the carrots and the stick side. So we are looking into regulatory changes, but also some of the incentives and things that can be brought to developers to enable these things to happen. But Stu, you may want to add more to that.
There are aspects as well, and there's points where I think on the last one, water reuse on the last webinar concerning assets, I'm sure George talked about current changes we're trying to influence with DEFRA, and there's a DEFRA consultation coming up in January where we're looking at things about water reuse and water companies being able to adopt those assets as they would anything else. So a rainwater harvesting system, a communal rainwater harvesting system, water companies are able to adopt that. So these are some of the changes that are being looked at and discussed, along with a variety of different asset arrangements that are being considered by water companies. Sorry, I can't quite see the question on me. My screen's frozen. Can you just replay back the question? Make sure I picked up some key bits there.
Is it best? So what's the best way to mainstream water smart communities in the future? Is this best through regional carrots, development subsidies and reduced rates from water companies, or national sticks, so legislation and things?
I think there'll be a variety of different measures coming through on that. But what we found from the project is this whole element of water stewardship. It isn't just sat with one player, it's getting all the different people to play their part in that water life cycle, not sitting with any organisation. But what we found from stewardship is we do need some key drivers to drive some of these changes through. But because they're a driver doesn't mean that it's all their problem. It needs to be shared out across the community at large, across sectors. So when we say sticks and carrots, I think there's got to be a myriad of that in any sort of system, but it's how we evolve that together rather than individuals driving that. But go on, Lucy.
I think as well, just very quickly, like absolutely both and all, because water has such a low, I guess, in the list of people's priorities at the moment, it's quite low, even though we know the risks associated with not managing it differently are increasing. And I think what's important for us as well is to really think about how this does feed into more of like climate justice. Every positive, well, not every, but the majority of good stewardship models that we have found are in the south of England, where land prices are higher. And I think what we're trying to avoid is where you get a discrepancy in, effective governance models that only sit within particular regions of affluence. And I think that's something we need to try and really collectively avoid when we're thinking about the policy levers as well as the regional incentives. But that's why we're really focused on, Greater Manchester and Liverpool, because we think it probably will need that regional scale. But I think it will just need a more national push as well to really put water quite much higher on the agenda, which is why the other aspects of enabling water smart communities program are feeding into this piece of work too.
If I could just add that whilst looking at it nationally, we are very aware of the devolution agenda and how this might give us flexibility to respond to different sort of like water situations and different economic situations and land value, in that whilst we're looking at a model which in its basic form will apply across all regions, we need to build a model that has the flexibility to respond to those specific regional drivers and constraints. So we'd like carrots on sticks, please.